So today, we're going to tackle a really fascinating and frankly complex topic: religious freedom in Indonesia. You see, this is a country that has some of the strongest legal protections for religious liberty you can find anywhere, at least on paper. But in reality, well, that's where things get complicated. We're going to dig into that powerful contradiction. And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. It's this question: what happens when a nation's laws promise freedom, but its society? Well, its society demands restrictions. That's the core tension we're going to unpack. All right, so let's start with what's written down, with the law itself. Because to really get a grip on this conflict, you first have to see just how strong the promise of religious freedom is, at least within Indonesia's legal framework. And here it is. This is the bedrock. Right from its original 1945 constitution, the state makes this incredibly clear and powerful guarantee. I mean, there's no ambiguity there, right? It's a foundational promise to every single citizen. And what's really interesting is that this wasn't just a one-and-done thing. In the year 2000, they actually made this commitment even stronger. An amendment added this clause, making it super explicit: you have the freedom to choose and to practice your religion. It's almost like they felt it was so important they needed to reinforce it, just to be absolutely clear. So as you can see, this isn't just one article tucked away in the Constitution. We are talking about a multi-layered, deep commitment. You've got the Constitution itself, then you have a specific law on human rights, and they've ratified major international covenants. I mean, on paper, this commitment looks absolutely ironclad. But, and this is a really big but, the legal promise is one thing. The reality for so many people is something else entirely. So now, let's shift from the promise on paper to this system of restriction that exists on the ground. Okay, so here's where it all starts to get tricky. The government officially recognizes only 6 religions. That's it. So the government has basically given itself the power to define what an acceptable religion is. And this policy, this idea of official recognition, immediately creates a hierarchy. If your faith is on that list, you're in. If it's not, well, you're out. And what that does is create this really stark, two-tiered system. Just look at the difference. If you're part of an officially recognized religion, you get full rights to worship and practice. But for unrecognized faiths, you're facing huge legal and social hurdles. Simple things that most of us take for granted, like getting an official ID card with your real religion on it, or even registering a marriage or a birth. It all becomes incredibly difficult. And think about the impact of that. Adherents of these unrecognized faiths are often forced to misidentify as one of the 6 official religions just to get their national ID card. Can you imagine? You have to officially state you belong to a religion that isn't yours just to get by in daily life. And it doesn't stop there. Imagine you want to build a new house of worship. Well, there's a rule that says you need to get approval from at least 60 residents in your neighborhood who are from other faiths. For a small minority group, that is an almost impossible hurdle to clear. It basically gives the local majority a veto over whether you can even have a place to worship. And this isn't just about faiths that are completely outside the mainstream. Even sects within a recognized religion can find themselves targeted. Take the Ahmadiyya community. In 2008, the government issued a formal decree ordering them to just stop spreading their interpretations of Islam. The penalty for not complying? Up to 5 years in prison. So, you have to ask, right? What is driving this huge gap between the promise of the Constitution and the reality of these restrictive decrees? Well, since Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim-majority country, part of the answer lies in a really important debate happening within Islam itself. And this is really the crucial point. The Quran itself, Islam's primary holy text, has this incredibly clear verse: "Let there be no compulsion in religion." That principle right there is absolutely central to the whole argument for freedom of conscience in an Islamic context. Now, a lot of this internal debate centers on one specific concept: apostasy. That's the act of renouncing or leaving your religion. And the question of what, if any, the punishment should be for that is a massive point of debate in Islamic law. And you can really break this debate down into 2 main schools of thought. On one side, you have the traditionalist view. This view is based on hadith, which are sayings of the Prophet, and it argues that apostasy is punishable by death. It sees it as a crime against both God and the state. But then you have the contextual view. This side argues, wait a minute, the Quran itself never says there's a worldly punishment. They argue those hadith were really talking about political treason, not just someone quietly changing their beliefs. For them, that Quranic principle of no compulsion is the most important thing. And in fact, a growing number of contemporary scholars argue that the case for no worldly punishment is actually much, much stronger. They point out a few things. First, the Quran never lays out a death penalty for apostasy. Second, the hadith that traditionalists use is considered legally isolated, meaning it's not strong enough to cancel out a clear principle from the Quran. And third, historical records show the Prophet Muhammad himself never punished someone just for changing their faith. Punishment only happened when it was mixed with treason or rebellion. Okay, so this brings us to a critical point. If the constitutional law is so clear, and the theological argument for freedom is actually quite strong, then what is going on? Well, the research points to one primary driver that seems to override everything else: social pressure. And when you look at how these restrictions come about, you start to see a really clear and frankly troubling pattern. It goes like this. First, certain social or Islamist groups called for restrictions on minority faiths. Then, to appease these groups, the government issues these restrictive decrees. In doing so, they often completely sidestep their own constitutional guarantees of freedom. And what's the end result? The rights of religious minorities are limited. And Bani Sharif Maula, the author of the source paper we're looking at today, really just hits the nail on the head. He concludes that these governmental regulations were ruled based on social considerations rather than to actually strengthen the constitutional principles of freedom of religion. It's about appeasing social pressure, not upholding the law. And all of this leaves us with a really fundamental question, one that goes way beyond just Indonesia. It's a question for any diverse democracy, really. Should a constitution's main job be to protect minorities from social pressure, or should a government feel it has to yield to the demands of the majority, even if those demands contradict the nation's own founding principles? It's a tough one, and it's definitely a question worth thinking about. Thanks for joining me for this one.